Elisabeth, thank you so much. I think you've really set the scene for what I'm sure will be a fascinating panel discussion. I'd really like to just very warmly welcome our next panel to the stage straight away, please. So give a warm welcome to Victor Galaz, who is Associate Professor at Stockholm Resilience Centre, Sarah Wamala Andersson, who is Professor of Health and Welfare Technology at Mälardalen University, and Robert Egnell, who is the Vice Chancellor at the Swedish Defence University.
And vi kör på. Welcome.
Warm welcome to you all. I'm going to kick off actually with a question to all of our new panelists as they take the stage here. Can you pick out anything in particular that struck you from Elisabeth's talk? Something that really sparked in your mind? I'll start off with you, Victor, if I can. Quickly. Yes.
I think I just feel the need to add more things to what you said, all these megatrends. I mean, geopolitical tensions, we're going to live in a warmer world, an Earth system that's changing rapidly, a less democratic world, and a world where we actually came out weaker out from the pandemic than we thought. Right? I think that worries me. If we're moving into a future with more crises because of climate change and geopolitical tensions, can we learn from our failures and actually build better? Policymakers love to talk about resilience, but they're really bad at investing in resilience.
Brilliant. Thank you. We're going to come back to plenty of those. Sarah.
Thank you, Elisabeth. What you were talking about is everything is interconnected. So we cannot talk about climate change without talking about geopolitics and global economics. So that's really important. And of course, the next one which comes in is health and security, which we are looking forward to discuss here. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Robert.
Well, I really like the couples analogy. Which is one way of describing the squabbles of geopolitics. Another one is sort of kindergarten behavior. The problem is obviously that these kids or these couples, they have nuclear weapons as their toys, which spells absolute disaster if things spirals out of control.
Yeah. So our panel here is going to be discussing sustainability and security. And actually, I just wanted to go back to the title of your book, Goodbye Globalization, but it's the second bit that really fascinated me, the return of a divided world. And I think we're going to be trying to talk about, well, if there's something that unites us, could it not be trying to find collaborative ways to deal with sustainability, the challenges of climate change, but also to take the flip side, is actually sustainability in this new geopolitical world going to exacerbate tensions? Is competition for resources going to make things really difficult? So that's really the setup for our discussion. But I want us to take the word security, because perhaps we're making assumptions about what we mean when we say security. Perhaps it's the sort of security, the hard security of conflict. But we also have plenty of other ways of thinking about security. And Robert, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about some of the unpack security as a term and how it's related to sustainability.
Absolutely, but asking a social scientist to unpack a concept is asking for trouble. But I'd like to go back to Andrei's really profound introductory remarks that I found quite moving. And he talked about a paradigm shifts when language collapses. And I think that's in many ways what I feel at this moment as well. That the way we think about the security, the actors involved, the problems we're talking about and how to solve them, we don't even have the language and understanding to deal with that. Traditionally, when we speak about security, we mean national security. It's about defending the nation from external military forces. That's what security is all about, which means that the assumption is that we live in an international society where states squabble or collaborate in alliances, and that is what geopolitics is, right? It's states relating to each other in bad and good ways. But that's a hugely narrow view of what security actually means. And I've always struggled with this, and I've tried to think about other ways, and I've used feminist theory, gender perspectives to try and collapse the idea that there's a public and there's a private sphere of security, which I think doesn't make any sense. But also the concept of human security that moves the subject of security from the nation to the individual and asks, what are the security challenges that we as human beings face? Or that groups face on an everyday basis. And suddenly the sphere of security expands dramatically. And if we look at them just the last few decades, we saw 9/11 happen, and suddenly terrorism and radicalization was clearly part of the security agenda. It really wasn't before that, and we can't even remember that time, right? International crime has become part of the agenda. A pandemic and climate change are suddenly at least part of the conversation, although I think within my traditional sphere, very few like talking about those issues and feel that now they're not really part of the security agenda, although it kills vastly more people every year on a global basis than war does. Not to speak about global health, for example, which we have the expert next to me, which kills in millions and millions of diseases that could be tackled with penicillin and a few health clinics in the countryside globally. But we are focused on the traditional security issues. So we need to think about security in new ways in order to understand the kind of challenges we're currently facing as human beings, as societies, but also how to tackle them. And not to think that the state is both the problem and the solution to these things. It might not be, actually. The state is sort of it's a human construction that has done us quite well for a few hundred years, but maybe it's time for another political construction to tackle the new issues of the world.
Victor, just go straight in.
Sure.
Why not? Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
no, I just want to second that, and I think that redefinition of what we mean by security is desperately needed. And I'm saying that looking back into the ambitions to securitize climate change. I know there's several experts in the room. Was that a successful move, so to say? And I would say no. I mean, the attempts to securitize global health in the beginning of the 2000s did not pan out well. We were not prepared for the pandemic because of that. The securitization of the Pacific has not made them more resilient to climate change. So I think that track in the way some policymakers have thought about it and some academics to an extent, I think has been proven wrong. So I think really redefining security the way you're talking about it, Robert, I'm fully supportive of that. It's really needed.
Can I follow up actually on one thing? Because Robert was talking about perhaps solutions being found outside the sort of traditional structures that we currently have. But one area where there are a lot of people have high expectations of solutions around sustainability and climate change is a sort of techno-optimistic set of solutions. Is technology going to be something that's going to help us along, or is it going to exacerbate our problems? Is it going to actually create further security issues?
Do I have 10 minutes? Or?
No, yeah, just sort of let's see, I'll time you.
No, I mean, I can talk about digitalization and AI. I think those are one of the things that I've been looking at. So I see some interesting early applications of this. I mean, to some extent, we will be better at predicting extreme weather events. We might be able to put these tools in the hands of people to allow them to adapt to climate change. But, there's a big but in there. And the big picture is that the innovation model of AI and digitalization is broken. Because what happens is that you have big companies producing big models based on a huge carbon footprint and then letting them out. And then the rest of us need to clean up the mess or the secondary negative effects that we see, whether it's misinformation or hallucination or whatever. We are there to clean up, civil society and researchers. So that innovation model where you just throw things out and everyone picks them up and then we'll see what happens, is not working, right? So will this be good or bad for climate change? I don't know. I think it's too early to say, but the evidence now and the big picture is that we're seeing more harm than good.
And if I can add one thing to AI and what it can do to help us save the planet, one actually quite frightening thing is that that is playing out in the insurance industry at the moment is that thanks to AI, you can better model climate risk, and you can better model where extreme weather events will hit. Well, that means that you will know rather too much about which parts of the world will be too risky to live in. And so in other words, some countries and some regions will become uninsurable. Well, so what does that do? If nobody is available, nobody's willing to insure those countries and regions, what does that mean for those countries and regions? It essentially completely decouples them from advanced economies and from any hope of future development. So I think there's a debate and waiting to be had about maybe we shouldn't want to know what AI can help us know, at least when it comes to the effects of climate change, because if we know that, then some countries are without hope.
I need to hold on to something here.
Or I shouldn't laugh. Actually, it's very serious.
It's very serious, and I really do want to come back to questions of inequalities. But before we do that, I'd like to bring Sarah in, please, because as Robert was teeing up, health security and the phrase that really struck me during the COVID pandemic, that the World Health Organization, no one is safe unless everyone is safe, is something that is almost also applicable to climate change. And I wonder whether you wanted to sort of talk a little bit about how the disruption that we're seeing in the world is impacting upon health and health safety as well.
First of all, I just want to say that health is going to be the most wanted good. And we know that every child that is born today in Sweden will live 100 years. Most of you will live at least 90 plus years. So that should give some kind of perspective. So in which world are we going to live in terms of sustainability and climate change? Having said that, so health is not in isolation, and we saw that in COVID, that there are certain things structurally that needed to be in place, which we knew about, and we didn't do anything about it until the pandemic broke out. But also there is another thing related to that human health is not in isolation from other living organisms. So now there is so much talk about One Health, because we know that with a COVID example, that about 60% of the new infectious diseases come actually from the animals. And we also know that for the last about 30 years, that we have about 30 new human pathogens, which actually related to the 70% being related to the animals, those which live within our houses, but also those outside. So that brings another dimension of thinking of health in a holistic way, but also related to the socio-economic structures that we live in.
You talked about during COVID that we knew we should have been prepared, but we weren't. And then you've given examples of, essentially other ways in which we can expect health disruptions to take place. What should we be doing to prepare now? What sorts of decisions, investments should we be making?
That actually takes us to the theme of this conference, which I really liked. It's about knowledge. We know that knowledge, so the next one is to have the confidence to use that knowledge, implement it in our daily work practices, and then the leadership to lead the change. I think that's really actually what we need, because we have that knowledge, and we need new knowledge, of course, through research, which is really important. But we need to have the courage and the confidence to use that knowledge and lead the change.
Yes.
Since you asked how we can prepare, it really involves every part of society. And in the UK, for example, the government conducted a brilliant exercise involving a pandemic threat. I think it was pandemic flu in 2017. But then, after the exercise had been concluded, it was put on the shelf somewhere, and obviously then COVID struck, and everybody was unprepared in the UK as elsewhere. And I think one of the problems was that nobody likes to think about black swan events or just high high impact, low probability events is just too depressing. And you, especially if you are the government, and especially if you are elected representatives of the government, you don't want to tell the public about it because it really is too depressing. And you hope that that event will happen in the next election period or parliamentary period, so that your government doesn't have to tell the public this unpalatable news that there may be a pandemic, there may be various hostile state threats, or indeed not just threats, but forms of aggression, acts of aggression. So it's better, it's easier to just hope they will go away. But of course the price you pay for that is lack of preparedness when it does happen. And one of the challenges is, even for a country like Finland that prides itself on being very prepared, Finland has prepared itself for territorial invasion. It has stockpiles and so forth to go with it. But the new threats we are seeing, pandemics and other threats and black swan events, is you can barely predict what sort of contingency or calamity it is that will hit you. So land war is just not the only thing anymore. And how do you prepare for those very varied calamities that can hit you? And what do you tell the public? I mean, you have to tell the public somewhere so that we don't repeat the COVID experience, but what are you going to tell them? Will you say, we face this wide range of threats, just bear that in mind, or do you say something more concrete?
We're sounding like a little bit as a Donald Rumsfeld, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns and things like that.
That was wisdom in unknown unknowns.
I think to some extent it's quite straightforward, especially when we talk about health and climate change. So there was a Lancet Commission, I think 2015 or whatever, said that investing in health systems is one of the best climate adaptation strategies we have. It has so many co-benefits. It's going to be of use for us, whether it's a new infectious disease or a heat wave or whatever. So investing in health systems, I think, is a wise strategy. So there's a need to connect the threads here between climate adaptation and health investments.
I was
just wondering also if we can connect this discussion to resilience, Victor and Sarah.
Of course we can.
Because, of course we can. We can always do that. Since this is about expecting something unexpected, and the system needs to sort of be robust enough. Health, as you say, also I guess education in a society, etc. Now the minister is not here, but Victor, nature. So please go ahead. All your best arguments for resilience, and also as to Elisabeth also. The resilience of the globalized world. Hasn't trade sort of found its way, even if we have a less globalized world? So I would like you also to unwrap that. But Victor can start, please.
Okay. No, I mean, of course, resilience for us at the Resilience Centre is central. And that is just like a basic observation of the world. The world is changing rapidly. It's a complex, evolving system, and surprise will hit us. And there are certain principles that you can abide to build resilience. I mean, there are diversity, modularity, etc., and learning. And there's a long list of it. The challenge here is like, how do we translate that into policy and to specific policy? Because there are trade-offs. But the thing is, at the moment, is that we're so far away in the way that policymakers think about resilience and invest in resilience that they're not even getting that nature is one of the best insurance that we have to cope with a changing planet, right? So I think just getting through these principles and operationalizing them is what we do. And you need to do it in many systems, right?
You need to make a list of short-term sort of returns for the politicians to tick off in order to, win the long term.
Yeah, and so, I mean that's what my colleagues do every day.
I am sure.
Yeah.
Elisabeth, please.
Yeah, so it's... by the way, how many people here are from the private sector?
Private sector, please, yeah.
Okay, so quite a few. And I think there's an opportunity here for the private sector. Often the resilience debate is framed along the lines of how can we make the private sector pay so that, into some sort of collective fund along the lines of what the Finns do with their stockpiles, but this collective fund for sort of resilience against everything would have to be much bigger. And how can we make companies pay into it because they clearly don't have an incentive to pay into something that may not benefit them directly. But I think actually this is an opportunity for companies to position themselves. Everybody is aware of all the bad things that can happen. You only need to follow the news for a few days and you realize, oh, we're in trouble. So this is an opportunity for companies to position themselves vis-a-vis other companies, vis-a-vis their competitors. And one company that has done that really well is Maersk. I don't know if there's anybody here from Maersk. Okay, so I'll tell the story of what Maersk did. So Maersk was obviously, as I think you all remember, completely brought down by a Russian cyber attack 7 years ago. And this cyber attack brought down various other Western companies as well, and much of Ukraine. But Maersk was essentially went dark for 6 days and only recovered because somebody in Ghana had not turned off his computer. And with his computer, Maersk managed to stay alive. That's how it went, Ghana. And so what Maersk did after that was not crawl underneath a rock and say, oof, this was embarrassing. What they did was instead go and tell the whole world about what had happened to them and what they had learned from the experience and how much better they are positioned they are now and how much better defended they are now. So in essence, the message to everybody out there needing to ship goods, which is all of us, is you can use Maersk because we know what it's like, and now we are extremely well defended against anything that can come our way.
So it's storytelling again, isn't it?
It is. And so I think there's an opportunity for other companies, including ones that haven't experienced any sort of meltdowns like this or haven't been harmed by geopolitical threats or indeed other calamities, to say, look, we are aware, just like you are, we are aware of all these threats, and look what we have done to become more resilient. That means that you can use us, our services, our products, with confidence because we have put these policies, measures, practices in place. And imagine the confidence that would instill among customers and shareholders and prospective customers and shareholders,
and
even if it means paying a bit more, because you'll be able to use that company with confidence.
Robert.
Yeah, I mean, we always need to think about resilience at different levels, from the community level to the global level. But there's one thing that I think unites them, and that is the importance of trust. At the community level, trust in each other in order to support each other and tackle the challenges we're facing as a small community. At the national level, agencies, public and private actors, etc., but also at the global level. And unfortunately, then, the global level is governed by geopolitics. And we've heard what it looks like in the world. And that means we are currently completely locked in our ability to tackle the challenges we're facing. We cannot, at the moment, say, okay, let's talk for a while about Ukraine or about US-China relations, and after fighting about that, let's put it aside and let's talk about the Arctic and climate change, because that's surely an issue where we can agree on. It doesn't work that way. So we are currently in an international society that is completely incapable of tackling the great challenges of mankind today, which is really troubling.
So how do we reignite, if you like, an interest in engaging in these multilateral forums, in rebuilding, if you like, the trust that they stand for? Because, I mean, at the moment we're in total multilateral fatigue, lots of conflict. The question is, do we find small alliances here and there, or do we actually try and, reignite that more general sort of multilateral approach?
I think it requires a new form of international politics, which means we haven't discovered it yet. So this is sort of spitballing ideas, really. But I think going back to strengthen the existing institutions like the UN and the Security Council, I don't see that happening, because it's based on this interstate logic of geopolitics, which means if it's not happening in the Security Council because of geopolitics, nothing's happening. So I think we need new forums for international, or I'd say global relations between a new set of actors as well. We cannot just allow states to govern the way this world, what happens to this world. But we should think about much more actors. The business sector is hugely important and has more resources than most states even. Civil society actors. Now we've heard the Fridays for Future movement is sort of struggling hugely, but what a movement it was. And if we can engage people on a global level that way around certain issues, that I think would be really important. City actors, the mayors of the major cities of the world usually have much more in common than states do in tackling the kinds of problems we're currently facing. They should be around the table at least and be given a voice. And we previously talked about technology and AI. For me, it's just a force multiplier. Whatever we want to achieve, technology will help us, which means it can achieve destruction for mankind, but it can also be the solution to all our greatest challenges, right? Depending on how we use it. Technology is neither good nor bad. But what I'm pretty sure of, with the little I know about AI, digitalization, is that it will profoundly change the way we relate to each other as human beings. It will transform our societies, how power and resources are distributed, and political loyalties. And that means we have it's very hard to imagine that future and the actors involved in the solutions that we must come up with.
I want to bring some other people in here, but I wonder whether there's a risk of choosing the easy coalitions and leaving the difficult people, or those who are in the most difficult, most vulnerable situations outside of it, because well, they're not living in cities, but they are actually the most exposed because they're in coastal zones. And are we actually solving the problem there by trying to find new coalitions, new places to have these conversations? Sarah?
Yeah, I am more positive about technology and AI, and we've seen so many examples, like the COVID-19 vaccine could not have been developed in such a short time without the new technology. So there is so much that we have seen already, but I think we need to go back to the young people who will be doing the programming. Which kinds of values do they have? Which kinds of biases are we bringing into the algorithms that will be giving us answers? So I am very positive about technology and AI, how it's going to transform the way we live our lives and societies, and also contributing to the challenges of climate change. We know that with technology now, we can live actually up to 120 years because it will be able to predict the risk factors which we can avoid and live more healthy actually for a long time, for instance. So we need to think about that. And at the same time, there is so much going on. We shouldn't give up on humanity and human connection. That's what I saw when I was in Southeast Asia last week. That people are really doing stuff related to sustainability, working together with the business community, with the politicians, with the civil society and professionals. So there is so much going on, lots of billions of people who are really doing great work, which we don't know about. Maybe we don't want to know about it. But of course, the global relations are important, but we should not forget that there are local communities really working towards sustainability and better world.
I was going to say, you're right, Rob, that the alliances and intergovernmental organizations that exist today are mostly the result of, obviously, very ambitious efforts after the end of World War II. And there is an opportunity for new alliances to form, especially across the divide, and there isn't very much that unites us across this geopolitical divide anymore, but the climate does unite us. And I wonder if there's also an opportunity, so obviously the IPCC and already does its work, but I wonder if there's an opportunity to add to that, that important work. And there's also an opportunity, I think, for non-government leaders to play a role, because they just don't have the burden of being associated with a particular country's foreign policy. Bill Gates is obviously a fantastic example of that, the work that he has done is doing through the Gates Foundation, which is much more than many intergovernmental organizations have achieved. And on that note, I think what we are entering also an era where non-government leaders are beginning to play a larger role. We saw George Clooney single-handedly change the setup of the Democratic ticket in the US election by writing an op-ed in the New York Times. And I had a conversation the other day, actually before that happened, when Biden was still in the running, but related to who would be a viable candidate. And I said, my conversation was with somebody who was a cabinet minister under George W. Bush. And I said, well, I don't feel like there's anybody who is trusted across the country anymore. And I said, I feel the only person who would be in that category is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he said, no, I don't think he's trusted enough. The only person who's trusted across America is Tom Hanks. So there may be an opportunity for the Tom Hankses of the world.
Opportunity for Forrest Gump to write the rest. Thanks for bringing it to sort of something that's very much of the now, because I mean this year more than half of the world's voters will have gone to the polls, and we're all holding our breath somewhat. Alongside Taylor Swift with the American presidential election. And I'm just wondering, in that context, with many new administrations, some still to be formed, even in the European Union, is this just presenting new uncertainties, or are there particular opportunities that might arise in the next year or two as these administrations take office?
Can we also add the European perspective here, the role for Europe? Squeezed in between China and the US. And what we see now, I'm quite worried about the sustainability agenda when the security agenda is so powerful. And could we do handle both crises at the same time in Europe? Could we find that gem?
What do you say, Victor?
I think in principle you can. Right, and I think there are good suggestions on how you can combine a security agenda with a climate agenda.
Can you give me an example that I can believe
I mean, robust energy systems that are low carbon or no carbon, for example, or supply chain resilience. It's going to be helpful, both for climate change and... But the thing is that, do we really see that happening? I think what I see happening, and you might disagree with me, is that the whole focus on national security, geopolitical instability is sucking away resources and political attention from the transition we need to do. I mean, that to me is obvious. Another thing, so besides arenas and partnerships and Clooney and whatever, it's money, capital. Like, how do we mobilize the capital to fund this transition, not only here, but also in other countries? That to me is always top of mind when we talk about COP. It's not just only what we get in the agreements, it's also like, who's going to mobilize the resources to support other countries to move to that transition? And loss and damage. I didn't need to mention loss and damage. I know it's controversial, etc., but I mean, it's the right thing to do. That would build trust between the global north and south. If we don't build that trust, other political agents like Russia and China will be there to increase the divide between Europe and other countries in Latin America and Africa. So.
Anyone else want to reflect on what the opportunities might be in the coming years?
Well, there's always an opportunity that's just, depending on where you stand on the political scale, that your candidate wins, and you see that as a step in the right direction at least. But I do think the fact that we are so worried about the elections today means that whatever the outcome, there's something wrong. And that these candidates that we are worried about aren't the causes of the challenges we're facing, but rather the effects of societies really struggling in terms of finding an ideology or a common idea of what the future should look like. And that means populism and polarization are the words of today in each of these elections. So yes, the right candidate might win this fall, but I still think we live in the same political challenges for the years to come. And we'll see when we can move out of that. I, for one, think that things will get much worse before it gets better.
Sarah?
I think we need to do things differently from the political level, but of course we have to remember who puts these politicians in power. It is each one of us, and that also reflects what we think politicians and leaders should be. I think we need to go back to each one of us. In terms of Sweden and Europe, when I see the global positioning, so Sweden needs to shift mindsets, and that's what we have seen. Of course, Europe moving away from aid to trade, really meaning trade exchange. That's what China is doing in Africa. Really, so many things going on, and they just, rush towards, kinds of trade, which actually Europe has a much more advantage because there are other European values which are much more appreciated than the Chinese values. So there is an empty room there to fill. But I think it's taking too long. It has to move a little bit much faster. And in terms of science, we need to have the scientific diplomacy around the world, and I think that can also build more trust with, in terms of partnerships, and see how we can move forward.
We've heard a lot about different risks and opportunities in this newly geopolitical world, where we're waving goodbye and seeing globalization in the rearview mirror, and where security and sustainability are rubbing up, and in fact, to some extent, in tension, as well as potentially having the opportunity for collaboration. I want to come down to Sweden. How should Sweden organize itself best to meet the risks, take the opportunities, and perhaps also show some leadership? Any thoughts on that?
Well, friendshoring is happening as we speak, and it's a sort of a not quite friendly undertaking, because the friendshoring that is taking place and will continue to take place and accelerate means that countries will position themselves to become destinations for the manufacturing in particular, and other operations as well, that are leaving China in particular. So Vietnam has been positioning itself very successfully to attract such companies and such operations, but companies will obviously want to come closer to home, and so there are opportunities for us within Europe, within the European Union, and I think in all honesty, the EU is not going to act as one. It's going to be countries within the EU competing to attract that investment, and that's an opportunity for Sweden. Obviously, the jobs that are that should come back are not the jobs that left. It's not going to be relatively unskilled manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing has changed in the past 35 years. It's much higher skilled jobs, and that's an opportunity for Sweden to position itself if it has the workers, or can produce the workers, because that's obviously something that is hugely important in this equation. An example to learn from is Arizona, which has executed the most brilliant friendshoring strategy, reshoring strategy you can imagine. Arizona positioned itself very early on as a destination for chip fabs, and Arizona State University, the state of Arizona, and the Chamber of Commerce worked very closely together, which has resulted in several chip fabs being set up, being built in Arizona at the moment. There's just one catch, and what is it?
Good.
Tell me.
The workers. There aren't enough skilled workers to work in these factories. So if Sweden can position itself as a destination for high-skilled manufacturing, returning from China, and can produce the workers to work in such factories, or can say, we have a plan for how to do it, then that's a fantastic way of benefiting from this very sad development we are seeing at the moment.
Elisabeth, I'm so glad, because Mats Persson, the former education minister, would have been here. He's now the minister for, what do we call, arbetsmarknadsminister, Rob? So why don't we provide him with this excellent piece of advice? I think we should do that, actually. So more skilled workers to Sweden.
Robert, I can see you'd like to come in, and then we've got perhaps one question we'd like to wrap up with.
I know.
Yes, Sweden's approach to this. First of all, we find ourselves in an era of global strategic competition, as Elisabeth sort of beautifully described in her keynote. How does Sweden position itself in this, and what are we competing about? Well, I don't think the winner in this strategic competition will be the one producing the most arms most quickly, but rather the most innovative and flexible society that will be able to transform and tackle the challenges that are thrown at it, but also the opportunities that arise from technology that Sarah highlighted as well. So that should be the strategy, and that means a small country like Sweden cannot just look within its own border and do navel gazing and think we can be the most innovative space in the world alone, but rather also very much look for friends and partners in producing this type of society that we think will lead to innovation and transformation in the future.
We're only a few minutes away from a coffee break.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask the panel a question, but
2 minutes.
2 minutes away. Okay, so you've got about 30 seconds each to ask this last question. But also one you can take away and discuss over your coffee, which is, what are the prospects for progress, given all that we've just heard, both the bleak and the more rosy? What are the prospects for progress over different time horizons, 5, 10, 25 years?
They touched a little upon it, so maybe we can start with Sarah and Victor, and then let's see.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I agree with you. We need to invest more in innovations, but I think we forget that we have. We did a big study in region Skåne to look at young children, 6 to 11 years. What do they want to do in the future? It's amazing. So we are talking about technology and STEM. But children, they didn't even see that. So how do we engage children into thinking about the future 10 to 20 years? Because those are the ones who are going to do, the programming, the school technology and everything. But are they there? So we need to interact with them, with children, to see the real world of work and what is expected. So I think that's really very important to include children and young people.
Victor.
I think from my point of view, I mean, there's so many things you could say, but since we're celebrating Mistra today, I think what inspires me, I do think that there is a change, even though slow, within academia on how we produce knowledge, how we communicate knowledge, how we make sure that it gets out there, and I think that gives me a little bit more of inspiration of that these things are actually going to happen, and it's thanks to funders. Like Mistra, that we're seeing this.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Eva, are there any things you want to
No, I just want coffee now. I just want coffee.
Great. I'm sure you all want coffee.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth Braw and the rest of the panel. Thank you, and please have coffee and talk to each other and be back here in half an hour, and we will continue. Thank you.